Hello everyone, welcome to the People Development Summit of 2020. I hope you're having a great time, hope you're enjoying the event so far. My name's Jackie Barefield and I'm working at the moment as a learning strategy consultant. I'm helping organisations to regroup and perhaps redesign their learning functions in the wake of COVID-19, which of course has changed all of our lives. However, by background, I am a learning practitioner and I've worked with organisations such as Unilever and Barclays and MediaOcean, Group M, helping them in some cases to build a new learning proposition and in other cases to develop an existing learning proposition. And I always approach that with technology and digitisation in mind. So every design involves that to some degree, to a lot of degree actually. I'm not an expert in AR or augmented reality, or in fact any of the other realities that we'll be looking at today. I will be speaking to such an expert, but I'm going to approach this from the perspective of an L&D practitioner. I'm going to be asking the questions that hopefully you would like to ask if you were thinking about embarking on building such a project using augmented reality. Today I'll be trying to talk a bit about using AR for onboarding new employees, but of course there's a much broader perspective that we can apply this to. My guest today is David Sime. David is a published author and a qualified lecturer. He's worked with organisations such as Google and the Chartered Institute of Marketing. So I'm really, really excited to talk to David today and really grateful for him joining us. So let's just quickly say hello to David. Hi, David, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Before we begin, I'd just like to encourage everybody in the audience today to use the chat window, enter any questions into the chat window that you have, any comments or any observations that you have, because we're really interested to hear what your thoughts would be on using AR in a learning and development environment, or in fact using any of the other realities. So use that chat window. We will answer your questions in a Q&A session at the end. David, can you begin by just telling us a little bit, how did you get into AR? Where did this all start for you?
Well, it originally started about 20 years ago when I originally started my career in marketing. I found that there was a big disparity between what was available to smaller organisations and what was available to larger ones. And that drew me in the direction of internet and digital marketing, which was a great leveler of the playing field between multinational corporations and small kind of bedroom operations, who the latter of which could suddenly reach anyone and anywhere in the world. However, what happened was, as time passed, people's attention spans started to diminish online. And I was aware of this because marketing is about 70% analysis and research and only about 30% promotion. So using these digital tools, I was able to see how long people were spending, what they were engaging with, and when they were dropping off. Attention spans continue to diminish, and now people are watching very, very short videos. And it seemed to me that looking at the precedents of human behavior in the past, which again is a thing that marketers do, the next logical step from text to visual to video would be a degree of interaction. That was what people were still craving, and a degree of immersion, really taking them as close to the real world as possible rather than just being a passive observer or a passive reader or a passive viewer. And this pulled me in the direction of virtual reality. And I was lucky enough to be able to form a team which formed my sister company, Encore Reality, which deals with virtual and augmented reality. And that really does seem to be where people are engaging and they are maintaining their connection with the content. But it's also proved, I mean, my background is also in lecturing at colleges and universities and so forth. It proves to be a brilliant means of people engaging and learning by doing in a way that normally previously they had to do physically, but now they can do in a digital realm.
Just for the benefit of this session, I wonder if it would be useful for you to perhaps describe for us what augmented reality or AR is in a nutshell.
Largely speaking, most people as of yet aren't familiar with the difference between augmented and virtual reality. So in a nutshell, virtual reality tends to be where you are fully immersed in an experience. It's fully digital, and therefore if you've got a headset on, all you can see is that digital experience. So it creates an alternative reality, a virtual reality. Augmented reality is almost as it sounds. It's taking the real world, so you can see the real world around you, and it's just augmenting it, it's adding to it, it's putting a layer of digital content on top of it. And so that is the difference between augmented and virtual reality.
Okay.
There are other terms for augmented reality: mixed reality, extended reality. It's all the same thing.
So then on the same sort of lines, I wonder if we should maybe introduce some use cases, perhaps some examples that you can think of that that our audience will appreciate, may have seen already, may have used already. One of them that I know is the IKEA tool, where you can piece their furniture into your own room using your mobile phone. Have you got any other examples that you think our audience might have tried or seen or heard of?
Yes, well, one of the barriers that I think to what you're describing there is definitely an augmented reality use case, because what IKEA are very, very good at is placing or creating an environment, a contextually appropriate environment for their furniture, and they've been doing it for years in their actual showrooms and their centres, which costs them a lot of money. So they decided that wouldn't it be better to be able to actually give people the opportunity to just do that themselves. So this gives people the opportunity to take that barrier away, and also not only to see the thing in the context of a room which has been created by IKEA to be contextually appropriate, but to see it in their house and to see whether that wardrobe is going to fit in their bedroom. That bed is going to fit in their bedroom, that couch is going to fit in their dining room. This is genius, and the thing about augmented reality is it's become very, very accurate spatially. So you can, within around about a 2% tolerance of scale, get an accurate idea of whether or not that thing's going to fit, and equally importantly, whether it's going to look nice, whether it's going to fit the style of the interior. But another example, which I think might be most appropriate to things like learning and workplace learning and so forth, particularly onboarding of staff, would be using augmented reality for wayfinding and navigation. So say you're brand new into a company, and part of your induction could be being shown around the premises and where things are, and that in itself is time consuming. It's a lot of information to take in, usually on your first day. So wouldn't it be better if you could bring your phone out and just say, where is the finance department I need to speak to? And it would just bring up a series of arrows which would take you from where you are to where you needed to go in the finance department.
That would be massively useful, wouldn't it, in on somebody's first day? Where are the toilets? Where's the kitchen? I need to be at this meeting room that tells me the floor and the room number, but I've absolutely no idea how to get there. So does it use that sort of GPS technology to navigate around a building, or is it something different?
Well, yes, the GPS tends to work on satellite signals, so therefore it doesn't work very well indoors. And so it's very, very good idea in particular to use this kind of visual references to back it up, so that if it's not getting the signals that it requires to know where you are accurately, it will use, as Google's does, these kind of visual landmarks almost to reorient itself. And yes, that's exactly what you would use, would be a combination of the two. You can even, it's cheating slightly, but it does make for a more effective application, is to actually set physical markers around the building. You can use near field or Bluetooth markers, or you can use tiny little things that look like QR codes that you barely notice, but the app notices them. So those are ways to do it. Or you can just use the pure visuals of the building.
One of the things that I was thinking, there are three sort of elements that will be of value to an L&D community, or to particularly perhaps to HR in onboarding. There are places, and there are people, and there are things. So places we've talked about a little bit. It's certainly helpful in navigation, finding your way around a new building. Also, it's possibly useful, I think, for a new starter who may be under a little bit of pressure on their first day. They may have to go and meet somebody. Let's say they've got to go and meet the CFO, to be able to have that 3D experience of talking or listening to the CFO, understanding who they are. I don't know what they sound like, what they look like. I presume you can get that from a video. You could be sitting at your desk and you could fire up a video. What do you think the advantages are of using AR over a static new starter environment on an intranet, for example?
Well, that's actually a very good point, and I can provide another example in the comments of a system that we created for just that purpose. Now, this one is virtual reality. It doesn't require a headset. It can be run on a phone or it can be run on a PC. But the main thing is that this one, you are fully in control of the environment. You don't have to physically go anywhere to activate it. You just walk in, virtually walk into your building, go to your desk, and then if you're wanting to find a specific person, you can walk around the building in virtual reality, find them, click on them, and they will describe who they are to you, what they do, again, their contact details. And this, although I was espousing the virtues of learning as you do, rather than prior learning, sometimes people really value familiarization before they get into that kind of environment.
For many years we've had a video of the CEO in saying, welcome to our company, we're really glad that you've joined us. But I imagine that when you're in this virtual reality, if you're in that environment, it feels like you're actually having a conversation, or that person's talking to you more than it would do if you just fired up a 2D video. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. Although this actually does use a 2D video within the context. So it's basically, as we'll see in the video here, you're moving around the 3D environment, you're seeing the person sitting there, but when you click on them, it brings up what is effectively a YouTube video. There are alternatives, and those alternatives are that we create avatars. Now, an avatar is a virtual person. So it's a three-dimensional person. It's rigged, which means almost like a marionette. It has joints and can move. We can, and this is quite recent technology, we can plant your actual face onto that avatar. And even with even more recent technology, we can make that face respond in the way that yours would. So that as you're talking into even a webcam or something like that, your avatar in the virtual world, your 3D counterpart, is talking and moving, and its expressions are changing, eyebrows are moving as it's talking to you. So that really does achieve what you're talking about, a real sense of immersion.
Amazing. Well, look forward to that one. That sounds a bit scary at first, but then all the best things do sound scary, don't they, at first?
Well, I'll put in an example as well, and we should be able to see it now, which shows this being used with kind of slightly cartoonified avatars, so that your facial expressions are being mimicked by this almost cartoon representation of yourself.
What's the typical cost of a good quality or a suitable quality headset that might be used 1,000 times a year, or maybe 400 or 200 times a year?
That's a good question, and there seems to be a precedent for the base end, the kind of entry level on this, and the entry level is quite high in terms of quality. The cost is hovering around about $400, €400, or £400. That's not a lot, and that's because most of the technology, most of the hardware is pre-existing on the phone of the user, and therefore it's really just this thing becomes a display device. Now, that's for augmented reality. For virtual reality, we have a couple of, again, main entry-level contenders, and they, the Oculus Quest and the Pico. And these are proving to be very good, but they're really good for, not particularly good for walking around, because you can't properly see the environment around you. You can a bit, but not brilliantly. So those, again, even though all the hardware is in them, they're self-contained. They're what we call untethered. They don't require to be connected to a PC or anything. Again, about £400.
So that was interesting, because that was something I hadn't really thought of, was that the glasses or the headsets, you still need the device, which is the one that's the bit that's doing all the work, really. So that's really interesting to know. And also the VR sets that are self-contained units and don't need to be connected. What about production costs? If I wanted you to, or if I wanted somebody, or if I wanted to do myself, to map my my office, for example, so that I could use those navigation tools for a new starter. What's the process there, and what sort of cost would I be looking at? And is it something I could do myself?
Oh, that's a good question. For the example that we showed earlier, where we're wandering around the building and clicking on people and bringing up YouTube videos, that used to require somebody, a specialist with a specialist scanning device called a Matterport scanner, to arrive on your premises and spend the day working their way around with the scanner, which of course incurs costs. Not least travel costs for the specialist, because you might have premises in many different locations, some quite far flung. So the newest innovation is that the people that produce this kind of system, they want to make their money as a software as a service. They don't really want to be bothered with hardware costs and the maintenance and so forth again. So they've worked hard to make it possible to actually create and generate the information required for this from a mobile phone. So now with any kind of mid to high end or relatively recent iPhone, you can just download an app and it will create a very similar level of quality experience to the one that you've just seen.
Do we have to ask our IT departments to get involved here? Do we need to ask them to help us by supporting the technology, or in that least scenario, for example, we'd go straight to the supplier, would we?
If it's something relatively straightforward, like an untethered headset, like the Pico or the Oculus Quest, then it doesn't really require IT to be involved because it's built for non-technical specialists to use. It's a consumer level device. Similarly with Unreal and Nreal and Apple Glass, the augmented reality devices, again, they're built for consumers, so they shouldn't require IT to be involved. When you're dealing with the more sophisticated tethered headsets, for instance, the high-end stuff that's maybe about £5,000 plus a 2,000 PC to run it, and that would be used for things like engineering meetings and really fully interacting accurately with the objects. That probably would require IT to be involved because it's, there's PCs involved, there's connections, things can go wrong, and you really want the guys who know their stuff to be on hand to help you set that up and make sure it's still working.
So thanks for all of those examples. They've been really, really useful, and it's also been very useful to hear a little bit about the cost and the setup and some of the things that we need to take into consideration if we're going to go ahead with this. So we've talked about the benefits, and we've talked about the challenges as well. We've talked about how we could improve and augment our onboarding programs for people, and also for other learning programs. We talked a little bit about cost as well. We talked about whether we need to get support, and so finally then on to my last question, which we briefly touched on a minute ago, which is about security. And I'd be very interested to hear your views on that. Is it a big consideration for us? Do we need to be concerned about the information that we might be sharing in this way?
In terms of security, certain data security, certain devices are part of broader platforms. For instance, Oculus was bought by Facebook. Facebook basically make most of their money from data. Data, as many of you will know, is now as a resource regarded as being more valuable than gold as a commodity. So therefore, when you use the Oculus Quest, which belongs to Facebook, they will be gathering data on you. And therefore, a lot of larger organizations that we've dealt with, from Royal Caribbean to do some Babcock or Shell, are really not keen on their information potentially being open or exposed to competitors, and to other people who may have nefarious uses for it. Similarly, we've dealt with lots of things like scanning of airports, and there's real kind of international anti-terrorism security concerns there. So we have to be very careful with that information. And we've also been asked to create augmented reality programs for young preschool children and vulnerable at-risk groups. And again, we have to be very careful to make sure that there is no way that data can fall into the wrong hands. Although there are two devices, the Oculus Quest and the Pico, at the base level, a lot of people are moving over to the Pico because it's not owned by Facebook and it doesn't require or take any other data. What we're also doing is that we are sending out devices to companies that are preloaded with the apps. They have no connection to the internet whatsoever beyond things like GPS for wayfinding. And that means that there is key security. They're completely isolated from the internet. There's no way that anybody can access that information. But we can encrypt and encode the information on there so that even if the hardware were to fall into the wrong hands, it could not be hacked back out of the hardware. The only people that would be able to access that would be ourselves or the client if they've been given the encryption keys. So there's that. But then it comes to other things like security, as I mentioned. We're dealing a lot with the oil and gas industry, offshore renewable energy. There's a lot of risks involved there. There's a lot of travel involved there. So by using the means of what we call remote telepresence, and that is taking people to other places without them having to physically go there, we can put a number of stakeholders from finance to marketing to you name it on an oil platform. They don't have to do a NABOSH, they don't have to do a working at height or working offshore qualification. They don't have to be insured. They don't have to be trained. They don't have to spend a lot of time flying to a location and getting a helicopter across to an oil platform. They literally just stick on a headset and they're there doing a live site inspection with 5 other people from potentially anywhere else in the world. The same thing can apply to training, and it saves a lot of money. And in the case of renewables, it saves a lot of carbon. It's also good for the security in terms of healthcare because it reduces the requirement for people to come together and potentially pass contagions onto each other, which of course we're all very aware of right now with the COVID-19 pandemic.
One of the things that I do find interesting, David, is that this is now in a real possibility for smaller organisations, and I think it's something you mentioned at the very beginning there, that it used to be the only really justifiable in huge organisations to get that return on investment. But I think that now the costs are coming down and things are becoming more sort of self-managed, if you like. Then this actually opens it up to smaller organisations to really kind of start pushing the boat out and see what they can do with it.
Very true. You can have everything that you need to run a full immersive virtual reality experience in your organisation, hardware and software, for less than £100 a month.
Yeah.
The hardware about 50. So it's really, really easy to do. It's really accessible, and it will only get cheaper and more accessible. But I would recommend that it's already at this stage, this tipping point, where the affordability and the accessibility is good, and the level of competition for other people leveraging that technology is low. But what's going to happen is the prices are going to go down, but your competitive edge with using it is also going to diminish over time. So now's the time to get involved, and also now's the time to help to steer it by speaking to people like me and just going, okay, this is great, but can you do this? Or I'm worried about this. Can you solve that?
So that brings us to a close. I'd just like to say thank you so much, David, for joining us in this session and sharing with us all of that wonderful information. It's been really useful. Thank you very much. Now, David's going to stay with me for another 10-15 minutes, and we're going to open the session up to the audience to ask any questions or observations that you have. We'd be really interested to hear. So let's do that. Let's move over to the Q&A session, and thanks again for everyone for joining me today.